Hello and welcome to our webinar. My name is Corinne Barker, SSATB's Senior Director of Professional Development, and I will be moderating today's session. Thank you for joining us for our webinar today entitled Enhance Your School's Website. Learn how 3,000 private schools approach web navigation and responsive design. And I'd like to extend a special thank you to our two presenters today, Peter Barron, Senior Product Marketing Manager for Blackbaud's K-12 group, and Stacy Jagodowski, who's the Director of Communications at Cheshire Academy. Because we have so many participants today in the webinar, we will be muting the attendees throughout. However, we do ask for you to please type in any questions you may have into the question box on your GoToWebinar control panel. We'll be happy to take these questions as the presentation goes on. So as you think of something, please type them in and we will raise the question with Peter and Stacy as we go. This webinar is also being recorded and will be made available online on admission.org's webinar page. And now I'd like to welcome Peter, who's going to start us off today. I'm going to give him controls of the webinar screen.
Great, thanks. I appreciate it. I'm excited to be here. Indeed, you see our title slide here, so it's Rock Your School's Websites, Lessons from 3,000 Independent Schools, and we'll talk a little bit more about that in a second. Before we do, though, let me go ahead and just advance my slide. So put a face to the name, right? So I'm Peter Barron. I'm the Senior Product Marketing Manager for Blackbaud K-12. If you can't tell, that's a photo of me standing on top of the Space Needle. So I'm on the West Coast in Seattle. And to my left there is Stacy. And Stacy, I'll let you introduce yourself.
Sure. I'm the Director of Communications here at Cheshire Academy in Cheshire, Connecticut. And my photo is me sitting in my office back when I was working at Derby. It's kind of an old photo, but yeah, I'm on the East Coast.
Yeah, so we got the East Coast and the West Coast covered, two different time zones, and we've got all kinds of content to share. What we're going to cover, so we thought we would lay it out. Really, we've broken this into three parts. The first is what is web usability, and we're going to provide a case study on top of that, which Stacy's going to share. And then we're going to talk about a report that was produced for higher education, and it will make sense as we go along. And then lastly, we're going to dive right into this report and that Blackbaud K-12 produced. We've got a ton of data to cover. We're going to have examples of how Cheshire has applied the data. I think it's going to be really informative. And with that, let's set the bar. So when we first built this, it was 125 slides. We thought, that's a bit too many slides, so we cut down to 124. So we've got 124 slides that we're going to hit in 60 minutes. And with that, we're going to get ready, set, and go. And the first slide that we have here is, what do I mean by web usability? So, when I posed that question, I figured we should have an answer. And, the definition of web usability is the ease of use of a website. Some broad goals of usability are the presentation of information and choices in a clear and concise way. That makes a lot of sense. You want your site to lack ambiguity, and of course, you want to make sure that you're placing the right information in the right areas so that it's really easy for folks to understand what you're asking them to do and the kind of content that you're asking them to research. So ultimately, it begs the question, if that's the definition, how do we actually go about that process? How can we ensure a good user experience? And, to date, we've had a few tools at our disposal. So maybe you're looking at your web analytics to get a sense of, how are people flowing through my site? Are they spending, too much time, too little time in certain areas? You've got that pool of data that you can begin to analyze. Maybe you're doing things like focus groups. Maybe you're doing heat map targeting. Maybe you're doing card sorting and tree jacking. There are a lot of different ways that you can go about this process. And, Cheshire actually had an opportunity to use some of these tools. So I'm going to let Stacy talk about how she went through the process as they prepared for the launch of their new site, and then we'll circle back and look at some of the data. So Stacy, why don't you go for it?
Great. Thanks, Peter. So we did our redesign. It launched itself in August, and we began the process of it back in September of the previous year. So it was almost, was it like 7, 8 months that we spent doing this? So we began conversations with Whipple Hill, and we talked a lot about wanting to really make the best website ever. And part of it was going to be fixing our navigation. The feedback we were getting is that our website needed to be a little bit more a little bit more better organized for us. So we did a lot of research, a lot of which is included in this report that Peter's going to be going through as we continue on. But one of the first things we did before even tackling the navigation was to determine our target audience. And for us, we opted to design our site to primarily serve prospective students. And this was a major decision that drove the rest of the design process, particularly our navigation. So in this slide that you're looking at right here, these are the goals that we had for doing our navigation. And as I present, you're going to see these top 4 goals appear over and over and over again. This was how we kind of organized what we were doing and drove what we had. So number 1 was to simplify the navigation and make it easier to find what you need. And then simplify again. We wanted to reduce the redundancy and the repetition and the duplication. You get the idea. Our navigation was not easy to use. We also wanted navigation that would support our marketing plan and promote our signature programs by utilizing keywords for which we were trying to rank for SEO, and I'll talk about that a little bit later on. We also wanted to try to stand out from our competitors. We wanted to come up with a fun, funky navigation that would set us apart. So you can see my little thing right there going around saying, nope, we don't want to be creative, because we discovered that being creative in this respect was a bad idea. So Peter, if you can flip to the next one for me, please. Sure. This is one of the things we did was we looked at the navigation that we've had over the course of the last 7 years. And this is what we had. So the top one is our oldest one, the middle one was in between that, and then the bottom one was our most recent one up until we got to this new one. We looked at these and we found out that our nav headers were too busy. There were too many things happening, too many places to click, too many places to look, and no one knew where to go to find things. So simplify. So Peter, will you advance again? Unfortunately, only one of us can have control of this, so you're going to hear me saying to Peter to flip through. So we brainstormed our navigation ideas, and Caitlin, my webmaster, and I had this great idea that we were going to turn our entire navigation into a call to action menu. And these are some of the ideas that we had: apply, learn, live, create, play, compete, support, connect, inform. And then we had CA Today, which wasn't a call to action, but we thought it might be kind of cool. So this is kind of our way to hopefully stand out from our competitors with something fun and funky. But what happened was this didn't really work well. In the next slide, you'll see what is our card sorts. This was part of the process for us to determine exactly what we were going to do. And this is one of the exercises through Optimal Workshop. Again, it's called Card Sort. And it asked, we asked a variety of users to go through and look at what is essentially this massive list of L2s and put them into categories. So they get to put them into buckets. And we found that most of the people automatically put the buckets into the very traditional academics, admission, community life, general information, about us, arts, administration, those kinds of things. So it seemed very, very normal. And we just kind of figured that's because they haven't seen our new idea. So in the next one, you'll see some of the information, the data that came out of this in the Optimal Workshop. We got to see the similarities of where people put different different L2 numbers, where they went. The darker the color, the more uniform it was, and where people placed it in terms of their buckets. And then we decided that we were going to take this a step further, and we were going to test it with another product called tree jacking, which is in the next slide. And tree jacking helps you figure out where people get lost in your content. And this was probably even better for us than the card sort. In retrospect, I think I would have done the card sort after we had determined the L1s and let the users place the different cards into the L2 and L3 buckets instead of the making their own L1s. But in the tree jacking, people were able to go through and look at they were given a task. Can you find something? So this is the Optimal Workshopping tree jacking exercise number 1. You're looking for the school's mission statement. So in theory, this should be something very easy to find. So in the next slide, there are results of how people went about to find it. On the left, you'll see our call to action navigation, which was our fun, funky one, and on the right, you'll see the results for our traditional navigation. At first glance, it's pretty easy to see that the call to action navigation was a big old failure. 70% of people could not find what they were looking for. There was still some failure on the traditional nav, but much less failure. And the next slide is the one that was even more telling to me. This slide shows you the actual path that people took to try to get where you need to go. The left is the call to action nav. Again, the right is the traditional nav. Our call to action nav is all over the place. People had no idea where to go with this. The traditional navigation was a bit more concrete. You can see that people, for the most part, went directly from home to admission and found the mission there. We tried doing CA Today, but you can also see that people didn't really understand CA Today. They didn't know where to go beyond CA Today, so that kind of drove a decision that we had to get rid of CA Today. So with the 70% failure in our call to action navigation, we decided that it's time for us to go with a more traditional navigation. And plus, in the call to action nav, it actually took twice as long for people to find what they needed. So in the final project, which is on the next slide, we have a very traditional navigation. The marketing speak didn't fly. We also decided that admission needed the prime real estate of being the first one on the left. And in terms of marketing and SEO, we decided to have arts and athletics both be components of the L1s. SEO is a portion of your website that's affected, is affected by the L1s. L1s are part of your SEO. And then we decided that summer used to be one of our L1s, and we moved it under admission, and it's highlighted elsewhere on the home page. Sometimes it's highlighted more than once. So this was our final product, and the tree jacking exercise for me was the most important one to really drive how we came up with our navigation.
Yeah, I think it's really interesting that you start to dig into the data, Stacy, and you realize that all these assumptions that you have about new calls to actions and all these other ideas that may pop up as you're going through your site redesign, when you really come down to it, you've got to support those decisions with good, solid data and make sure that you're making the right choices for your institution. And the benefit of tree jacking and card sorting and looking at your analytics and all of that, it definitely gives you a feel for how your own institution is functioning. But there's also value to knowing how the broader school market is approaching these things as well. And really that's what led us to creating this report that we're going to talk about as we go through the webinar today. And the inspiration for it came from this fellow. His name is Stuart Foss. He runs a company called EduStyle. And if you haven't checked out EduStyle, it's definitely worth looking at. Essentially, it's a higher ed portfolio site. So universities, colleges will upload their latest website designs up to EduStyle, and then all the folks who participate, and it's usually communication directors, development folks, admission folks, usually everybody within higher ed will go in and critique the designs, and essentially you're crowdsourcing opinions about the latest designs that are out there in the higher ed world. And so a couple years ago, he started in 2011. He tracked data in 11 and in 13. And then in 2013, he produced this report that you see up on the screen, which is the Research Report on Navigation Trends in Higher Ed. And so we got our hands on this, and we were just fascinated by it. And the goal is to give colleges and universities a new tool that can be used to evaluate their website navigation against industry standards and practices. So this report, used in combination with other tools, similar to what Stacy was just talking about, enables institutions to give their users the best possible experience online. And you start to leaf through this thing, and it's pretty amazing the data that he pulled. So, for instance, he was measuring, how many higher ed sites had academic links on their homepage, so 73%. How many of them are linking to Twitter? How many are using calls to action? There's a lot of detail, and this is literally just an overview slide. It's like 30 or 40 pages long, so there's tons of data there for schools to take in. And it really gave us this idea. We thought, geez, this is a really valuable tool for colleges, but what about prep schools? What about this K-12 market that we're part of? And what we decided to do was to try to take this project on ourselves, and we actually ended up partnering with Stuart, and he helped us produce this report that you see right now, which is the Private School Digital Insight, Enhancing Web Navigation and the Rise of Responsive Design. And it's a free report. I've got a URL to, it's actually a rather lengthy URL, but if you go to k12.blackbaud.com/resources, that's a little easier to remember, you can go and grab your free copy of this at any moment, right? There's no cost to it. We underwrote this entire thing so that we could give back to the K-12 market. And ultimately what we ended up doing is we measured 2,925 sites. So we said 3,000, we're a little shy of that, it was actually 2,925. And we tracked a number of different things. So we were looking at how many schools have videos on their homepage. Where are schools putting their menus on their sites? How many URLs are on a page? Are schools linking to their social profiles and badges? Are schools putting their phone numbers? I mean, you can see all of the different things that are up here. And what was neat about this is because the list was so extensive, and we actually were provided this list by our friends at Porter Sargent, we were able to do a lot of really cool things. So we were able to segment the data by into a number of different buckets. So for instance, we were able to look at data by school type, by religious affiliation, by grade level, by state and region, so that we could begin to give you an even clearer look into how schools that are similar to you are approaching these different things. And just to give you a feel for some of the high-level data, again, we measured 2,925 sites. We learned that .org is the most popular top-level domain. We also learned that at the time that we pulled this data, so this was in August of 2014, that 78% of schools in the U.S. did not have a responsive website, and we're going to talk a lot more about responsive later on. You can see some of the other data that's on here. One that I really like from a call to action and SEO standpoint is that there are 58 links on average on private school web pages. So there's a lot here to take in, and we broke it into five main parts. So we looked at a homepage overview. We then dove into responsive web design. We looked at navigation. We looked at social media. We looked at SEO. And the first section, of course, is this homepage overview. And as you're looking at it, there's some really interesting data here. So for instance, we discovered that 88% of you are using drop-down menus like you can see right here, and that 89% of you actually list a phone number on the site, which is really important, especially in the mobile age when people want to just tap on that number and make a call. We also learned that 77% have news feeds versus 70% that have event listings. 91% of you actually offer your address, which is great to see, and 34% of you have videos that are embedded on the site. We also saw that 74% of all schools use a .org domain, and then as you begin to break it down some more, you see that top 15% are .com, 4% .net, 4%, the lucky 4% are .edu, and then the remaining 4% use some combination of other domain extensions. You may be asking, well, how did that 4% get the .edu? We've got actually a description or an explanation on the slide. EDUCAUSE in 2001 took over control of the .edu domain, and essentially what they said is, look, we're only going to issue .edus to accredited colleges. So if you had a .edu pre-2001, I can think of a handful of sites that are in that category, Mercersburg.edu for one. You were grandfathered in, you can keep it, but that explains why the vast majority of schools have that .org domain extension. Now, what we're going to do is we're going to actually look at some of this data, or Cheshire has looked at the data, and they're going to talk a little bit about their homepage design. So Stacy, why don't you take it away?
Great, thanks. When we first sat down and talked with Travis Warren about this, we told him we wanted the best website ever. We wanted bigger, badder, better, best. And our goals for creating our homepage in particular was we wanted it to, A, support the strategic plan and the mission of the school. 2, we wanted it to be designed for our target audience. 3, we obviously wanted it to look good, and we wanted it to have functional widgets. And 4, we really wanted to promote our signature programs. And we wanted to make sure that we covered everything that our target audience needed on this page. So what I did first, on the next slide, you'll see what is called the Wayback Machine. It's a website that lets you view past versions of your site. They're not always pretty. Sometimes they are missing links. Sometimes the photos don't work. But it gives you an idea to look back. And because I was new to Cheshire Academy last year, I'm in my second year now, I was redesigning for a website that I wasn't really familiar with the past iterations of. So Wayback Machine allowed me to do that. And if, Peter, if you'll just kind of click through the next few slides, you'll see the different stages that our website has been in. We've looked a variety of ways over time. And there's one more, I think. This is the one that's showing right now is the previous version of what we had before we moved into our next, into our final look that we came up with. So as part of the process, in the next slide, you're going to see a whole bunch of other sites that we looked at. This was all inspiration that we took from other schools, from universities, from corporations, from newspapers, everything we could come up with looking at responsive home pages, because we did make sure that responsive was part of our plan right now. We searched for inspiration everywhere, and we created our list of must-haves and can't stands and is it even possible. We really thought big on this. The next slide will give you some glimpses into our design process, and we worked closely with our designer to come up with a website that was going to be right for our audience. Peter, if you click again, we've got some animations that can come through here. They're a little slow, and I apologize for that. But these animations just kind of showed some of the process of what we did. We wanted to make sure that we got the website that we wanted, so we actually piled into a van. It happened to be my webmaster's like second or third day of work, and I loaded her into a van with me and our director of technology at 6 a.m. and we drove up to New Hampshire to see the team up at Whipple Hill and really work with them to come up with the exact site that we wanted that would best serve our community. On the next slide, you'll see that another iteration of our site. We kept working with them and tweaking things and changing things and making sure that we got exactly what it was that we wanted. At times we might have been a bit demanding, but what we ended up getting was exactly what we wanted. The tools on the home page, the look of the home page, calls to action, social media, calendars, and more. And on the next page, the next slide, you'll actually see the top of our this is the whole website. When you view it, you only see a certain portion of it at once because this is the whole lengthy piece. And I'll break this down into some of the other elements that we've had. On the next slide, we wanted to make sure that we included a call to action on the menu. It was very important for me to have call to action items on every page, and I definitely wanted them on the home page, so we did that call to action, the blue bar up at the top, inquire, apply, give, and connect. And we'll talk a little bit more about calls to action later on. And we also had the bold search function, which almost serves as a fifth call to action. The next slide highlights My Cheshire, which is our branded login button. That is the place where everyone goes to log in, and it looks the same across all of our formats because the responsive button just kind of breaks it down. Branded, easy to locate, right in your face. The next slide shows the large photo that we chose in the middle. These are static photos. They don't change, but they're interactive in the sense that in the next slide you'll see what happens when you hover over it. So if you go to our site, you'll see that hovering over it will bring up a transparent box that talks about our programs. So champion athletes, that's something that we wanted to make sure that we promoted, and every box has its own, every image has its own hover box that gives more detail on the programs. The next slide shows a little bit more of the detail of the lower part of our homepage. We wanted to make sure that we included elements of quick links, and those three buttons on the left-hand side are completely managed by us, and we change them regularly. We also have our news section. We, here in my office, we made a commitment to publish a story a day, and we do. We publish a story a day, most days. Every once in a while we miss a day. But we pretty much do 5 stories a week, and we wanted to make sure that those got some top billing on this website, and then we have the events. That was something that our prospective families told us they really wanted. We conducted a bunch of focus groups and asked them, what is it that you want on your homepage? The next slide will bring you down and show you that we've got a full screen banner that runs across, and this is a place where we can highlight the major programs that happen on campus. Summer program gets this most often, but we do sometimes put like Parents Weekend, Reunion Weekend, different things like that can run across that main one. Then we also have our Connect, and these are on every single page. Connect and summer program boxes on every single page. We have all of our contact information, the main phone, the main fax, the admission office, the athletics office, the development office, directions, map questions, our social media buttons, and then this green part is completely designed for SEO. It's got some of the keywords that are in there that we're trying to rank for, and it helps us just kind of make sure that we have regular presence on every page for some of those important aspects of our SEO campaign. The next slide kind of shows how we looked at the homepage elements that Peter mentioned before. The drop downs, yep, we've got that. We've got a news feed. We have event listings. We do have the phone number, but we did not do a video, and we do have the address. So we have most of the things that people have, most of the things that schools have put on their websites. And back to Peter now.
Peter, can you hear us? I think we may have lost him. Stacy, are you there?
I am here.
Okay. So
I'm back.
Oh, there you are.
Welcome back.
Guys. All right, so let's go ahead and look at responsive web design, which is one of our next sections here. And I'll start here because if you think about how computing has evolved over time, this idea of why we need to really focus on mobile becomes clear. So, in the 40s and 50s and into the 60s, we were in this mainframe age of many people to a single computer. We then went to a personal computing age where, one-to-one, and then we're in this ubiquitous age now where if you think about it, and I'm just looking at my desk, I've got an iPad on my desk, I've got an iPhone, I've got a laptop. We've got all of these different devices that are running our lives. And you think about how that translates into web statistics. If you look at this slide here, I'm not sure why it got a little blown up, but 24% of all traffic that was hitting Blackbaud K-12/Whipple servers in August of 2013 were either from a mobile device or a tablet. So specifically 13% were iPhones, 11% were iPads. So as schools, we need to really start thinking about how we can make our content available on those devices. And it's further supported by this report that Google produced a couple of years ago that looked at smartphone usage. And what they found is pretty staggering. I mean, they identified that 65% of people start searching for content from their phone. 63% start their internet browsing experience from their phone. And you can see how all of the different kind of buckets align as they're going through the chart. And the first time I saw this, I thought this is nuts. But then you begin to think about your own computing habits, and you realize that, yeah, I'm actually doing a lot of my personal web surfing directly from my iPhone every night when I'm not sitting at my desk. It really has shifted, and a lot of companies have taken note of this, right? So you've got all of these great companies on the screen, the experience that you're having on Facebook, the experience that you have scanning in checks with Bank of America. What's clear here is that these companies really understand that they have to be mobile first. And here are some examples. Zappos wants to make sure that if 65% of people start their purchasing path from their mobile device, they have to make it really, really easy for their customers to be able to buy things from their phone. So they make sure that that experience stands up as well on the phone as it does on the desktop. Amazon, the same thing, right? Tremendous amount of volume coming through the phone. They need to make sure they create a great experience. You're seeing universities have kind of jumped on this bandwagon as well. So Notre Dame, for instance, you should go down to the phone view. You can see how it stacks up. Obviously, 22% at the time of pulling this data were responsive. Private school websites were responsive. So clearly, schools are understanding the importance of this as well. So, there's lots of things to think about here in terms of why it's important. I think we've made the case, but the bigger question is how do you actually do it? And when we first started thinking about mobile, the initial instinct for many of us was, well, let's build an app. Let's make sure we have an app in the iPhone store. All of our parents, all of our students, all of our alums will make sure to download it. But then you realize that that's a really expensive proposition. That not only do you have to create an app for iTunes, but you have to create an app for Google. You have to create an app for Android, for BlackBerry, for Windows. There are all these different operating systems that you have to begin to support, and that comes at a cost that's prohibitive for many schools. And that's why responsive web design is such a fascinating alternative for schools. The phrase was first coined in 2010. It really started emerging in 2012. And ultimately what it is, it's a cost-effective alternative to building mobile apps. And the way it works is essentially, there's a grid that you build your design on top of, and if there are any communication folks on the line right now who have used InDesign in the past, the idea of using a grid to lay out print is probably really, really familiar to you. And then it uses this concept of media queries, which essentially means, when you hit the different breakpoints, so here are the three most common breakpoints. You've got your desktop on the left, tablet in the middle, mobile on the right, that certain images may show up, they may disappear. It's being smart about the different resolutions that are calling your site. So essentially your site's going to reshape itself depending on the different resolutions that you have or dimensions that you have up in front of you. And there are lots of examples of really successful sites that are doing it. Navigation is a big part of this. You can see the hamburger menu that you have up on top of the screen here. If you've done anything with your mobile, you're probably really familiar with tapping on that hamburger menu to display the entire navigation structure. But in terms of what was happening with schools, when we first did this report, we saw that just 22% of school websites were responsive. And then if you look at it by state, you can see, which schools have more responsive sites in the states. And if you look at the coasts, clearly the coasts have adopted RWD in a faster way than some of the states in the middle of the country. But then fast forward to January of 2015, we actually kept monitoring this data every month. So we looked at it in October, November, December, January. And what was fascinating was it's clear that this message is getting across, because when we first released this, we first took the data, it was 22%. Fast forward 4 or 5 months later, it's jumped all the way to 31%. That's a massive increase over a short period of time, especially considering the investment the schools have to make into creating websites. So, some of the takeaways to think about as you're contemplating whether or not your site should be responsive. One is, I don't know if you've heard yet, but on April 21st, Google has announced that it's going to start penalizing sites that are not responsive, which means you're going to start to see your site drop in the ranking when people are searching for you via mobile. Now, whether this extends over to the desktop experience, nobody really knows, but it's safe to assume that if Google's announcing a deadline, which they've never done before, that this is really important to them. They understand that mobile is a huge part of the search experience, and they want to make sure that your site is mobile friendly. And they're already going through and actually labeling sites as mobile friendly. So you can see here with Boulder Country Day, they've got that tag next to their name as being mobile friendly. If that's not reason enough, here are some others. We talked about the data before, but look, a lot of families, I bet if you went and did a survey of your families right now, if they did any searching for private schools on their mobile phone, I wouldn't be surprised if you return numbers that are similar to this. And when you consider the first impressions are so important, you need to make sure that you have some sort of a mobile strategy in place so that when families land on your sites, they're having an optimal experience. Also, as you're building responsive, you have to think a little bit differently about how your site functions. And really, visuals are the key when you're creating responsive sites. People are far more likely to process images than words. There's a lot of research to support that. Here's one example of it. You can go to that Fast Company article to get the details. And there are tons of great examples. Obviously, Cheshire's doing really cool stuff. Here's Sonoma Academy out in Sonoma, California. They really thought long and hard about how they can visualize data. So they've got these nice these nice images as you land on the site. But then as you begin to scroll down, you can see over on the right-hand side via this iPhone that they're actually, in a very infographic kind of a way, visualizing key data that's important to their school. So that is, one last thing before I forget. And also, you don't necessarily just want to be concerned with the front of the password experience. You also have to think about the behind the password experience as well. So if you're delivering information, allowing families to apply online, allowing them to check on admission checklists, things like that, make sure that you consider, what that experience looks like for them via a mobile device as well, because, the likelihood is that they're going to attempt at some level to complete your admission funnel tasks via their mobile device. Woo! I did a lot of talking there. So Stacey, I'm going to turn over to you and let you take us through your responsive strategy.
Great, thanks, Peter. So our responsive strategy, again, here's our goals. We wanted to improve the mobile tablet experience. 2, we wanted to kill what I term the Academy app. We hated that thing. And 3, we wanted to find inspiration for our responsive design, and we wanted to take advantage of mobile options. And for us, these goals are still kind of in flux. The next slide shows the inspiration. Peter showed the WWF, World Wildlife Foundation, early on and his slides, and for me it's also one of the biggest inspirations that we found. I just loved, Peter, if you can switch that slide, that would be great. I love their clean design, their very deliberate breakpoints, which is something very inspirational and something that we're still working on being more effective with in our layout. But viewing other sites can really help you drive your strategy for building a responsive site. On the next slide, you'll see our old app. Peter mentioned these apps, and everybody needs to have an app. We all wanted to have an app. In addition to apps being something that we have to get people to download, it's double duty. It's double duty for them. They have to go to your website to get certain information. They have to go to your app to get other information. And it's double duty for us. We had to manage 2 different things. We had to manage the mobile app, update it when something new got added, change something, and then we have the responsive. We had our old site. So when we switched to responsive, we're in with the new look. This kind of shows you the desktop view, the tablet view, and the mobile view, and it allowed us to just concentrate on one piece that allows us to promote our site properly. And like I said, we're still working on this, so our next slide is some of the goals that we're still working to be accomplished. Optimizing mobile for phone calls. One of the things we're working with Ripple Hill on is getting our phone number to be at the top of our responsive design, because if you're on a phone, one of the first things you want to be able to do is make that phone call. It's at the bottom of the page right now, but we want it up at the top, so that's a little bit of a changeover that we have to make. We want to learn more about responsive best practices. This is an area that is new for me. The previous site redesign that I did was not a responsive one, and so now we're working on that one. We also did test and surveyed our user, and we're going to continue to do that so that we continually build a site that is exactly what they want. Peter shared the Sonoma Academy slide before. That infographic is just awesome. So we're looking at how we can learn more about altering layouts and changing things up so that we get a site that is the most aesthetically pleasing but most effective layout possible when you're on your mobile device. So I don't have as much to say about responsive as Peter did, but that's a little bit of our strategy and how we got to where we are and where we're looking to go from here.
Cool. Hey, before I go to the next section, I just want to come back to this slide because I think it's a really great illustration of what it means to be responsive. So on the left-hand side, you can see the desktop view. So that's the traditional look at the site. Then it starts to get a little bit narrower when you get to the tablet view. But notice that the navigation that's prevalent on the left side is no longer front and center in the tablet view. And the reason for that is because if you look at the top left-hand corner, there's that hamburger menu. So if you were to tap on that hamburger menu, it would then unveil all the navigation that you have on the desktop view. So you haven't lost anything, you're just preserving some screen real estate. But then look all the way over on the right-hand side, and you've got the mobile view. So that's exactly how it would look if you were to dial it up on your phone right now. You've got that hamburger menu, so you have access to all of the navigation. But you haven't lost anything. You haven't lost any of the great content that was designed and developed and published by Stacy's team. Essentially, you don't have to make difficult decisions. If you have to, for instance, when she was talking about having this mobile app, she had to make decisions about what shows up here versus what doesn't. And that's rough for a family who's really interested in your school, and it's tough for you because you want to make everything accessible. Responsive makes that possible without any additional cost. And I think that's a really important thing to keep in mind as you're considering your mobile strategy. You want to make sure that all of this great content that you're publishing is available to families. You don't want to have to limit it to some subset. Okay, I'm going to get off my responsive high horse because I really do believe that this is important.
I'm going to actually chime back in with one more thing, Peter,
yeah.
On that slide. One of the things I've heard people say is that they're concerned about the mobile view being so long. And it is a long view, and you do scroll quite a bit to get through all of that content. But if you think about your actions on the mobile device, think about being in Facebook or being on Twitter what do? You sit there and you scroll to get through all the information that you need. That is a behavior that has become pretty normal for us in a mobile environment. So having that really long home page that spans, you need to scroll a few times to get through all of that, that's okay. That's part of what the behaviors are that we are doing right now.
I completely agree. It's totally ingrained in us at this point. Okay, so navigation. Here's the next section, and we had promised an hour, and I think we're right on track to get in there. I think we're keeping a good pace here. When we looked at navigation, we wanted to see, how are schools naming, their menu items, and what we found isn't actually all that surprising. I guess my guess is if we asked you right now, you'd probably be able to come up with some similar collection. So you can see people are saying admissions, academics, athletics, alumni, contact us. Think back to Stacy's original example way back at the start of the presentation when she had talked about trying to go down a different path and realizing that the way they were presenting information wasn't necessarily resonating. Makes a lot, in retrospect, it makes a lot of sense now that you have all this top-level data because families are ingrained with this particular navigation structure. And I think from a benchmarking standpoint, this is really helpful for schools. They're considering their navigation moving forward. We also discovered that 60% of schools have calls to action, while 40% don't. And a call to action could be anything from requesting information, applying, volunteering, donating to the school. Essentially, you're asking somebody to take an action of some sort, complete some sort of a task. And so 60% of schools are on that bandwagon and asking their community to contribute in some form or fashion. 40% of you haven't yet gone down that path, so that's good data to have. And in terms of some takeaways, first off, add calls to action. So if you're in that 40% bucket, think about how you can get out of it and get into the into that 60% bucket. In simple calls to actions like inquire or schedule a visit, complete a form, apply online. These are some of the calls to actions that you see over on proctoracademy.org. Additionally, you need to think about your navigation and how it displays in a multi-screen world. So when we looked at that slide a few minutes ago that showed Cheshire's site at the desktop, tablet, mobile, remember when it went down to that tablet view, it started to offer that hamburger menu, and you can see how how Proctor has done the same sort of thing. So they're thinking about how can they preserve screen real estate in order to give the best possible viewing experience for folks on these different devices. So that's another thing to keep in mind. I'll let Stacy, take away some of her calls, or some of her ideas now too.
Great. I talked a lot about our navigation before, and I'm going to focus on the calls to action in terms of navigation right now. As I mentioned earlier, one of the things we talked about doing was turning our L1s into calls to action, and when we tested it, it didn't work. So how do we get those L1s, or how do we get the calls to action to be a prominent part of every page that we have? It was a brilliant concept for the L1s, but very tragic in terms of the actions. We had to regroup and come up with a different approach. So the goals that we have laid out for this one were we really wanted to get people to inquire. You'll see that on the next slide. We wanted people to inquire. We wanted them to apply. We wanted them to give to the school. We want money. And we wanted them to talk to us, ask us questions, find out what it is that you need to know about us. So these were our four goals, and they just worked out really nicely to become 4 calls to action. One of the things you want to make sure you don't do is overwhelm your user with calls to action. It's very easy to go overboard and give them 7 different things to do with the calls to action. So back on our home page, on the next slide, you'll see that our calls to action. They're up in the blue bar that's on the top of every page with the search function serving almost as a 5th call to action. And they're placed there for a reason. That's part of the strategic planning of this. Users tend to gravitate to the upper right-hand side of their website to get the important tools. Think about where your shopping cart is when you're checking out on Amazon. You go up to the top right. And so we decided to place everything there for our calls to action. A lot of these calls to action are also duplicated on our page. So if you were to go to the admission page, I don't have a slide for that, but if you were to go to our admission page, you're going to still have these calls to action up at the top, but we're also going to have buttons throughout the text. And we're going to call out the calls to action there again. There's nothing wrong with repeating it. In fact, we find that people tend to do best when they're they see the same things over and over again, subtly over and over again. You don't want to just like have a list of buttons and say, here you go. But when you subtly work it into your material and your content, you make it easy for them to find the calls to action, and you duplicate them in the places that make sense. If you're talking about the application process, you want a link to apply online. It just kind of, that's how it works out. And so you want to make sure that as you're planning your site and you're planning your navigation, that you're really focusing on what to do with those calls to action, where to put them, where to duplicate them, and where they're going to serve you best.
Great. So another section that we looked at was social media. And so as part of this examination of 3,000 schools, what we found was that 68% of you have have social media badges, that are pointing to Facebook, that are 51% of you are pointing to Twitter, 32% of you are pointing to YouTube, 12% LinkedIn, you can see all the different ones, 8% Instagram. And then we broke it down in this particular slide around, school type, so you can see boarding versus day across the way. In terms of takeaways, right as we were putting this presentation together a couple months ago, Pew released a new study that looked at social media use. And one of the things that really popped out at me was that 18 to 29 range when it comes to Instagram has grown from 37% usage to 53% of folks in that range. Now, obviously, you're working with a younger demographic, 13 to 18, but I think it's pretty safe to assume that you're going to see consistent numbers in that age range as well. Because I know anecdotally, whenever I ask an admission office, where are your prospective students, what social media platforms are they using? Without a doubt, every single time, 99.9% of the time, schools are saying Instagram. That's where the game is played right now. So if you think back to this slide that I put up a second ago, only 8% of sites at the time of pulling this data had an Instagram tag. So if there's one thing that I think you can take away from this particular section of the report is that if you don't have an Instagram badge and you do have a channel, make sure you add one as quickly as you can, because that's an important communication channel that you want to funnel folks into. There you go. There you go, Stacy. Yep.
Thank you. So social media has been a very important part of our marketing plan. In fact, we do have an individual who's part of our team, Cody, who heads up our social media. So our goals for our social media implementation into the website in particular is we wanted to have our main accounts on the home page. We also wanted to have them on all of the internal pages. Again, we wanted to utilize some keywords, and we wanted to highlight the social streams within the site. So we took a multi-avenue approach to doing this. On the next slide, we'll go back to the home page again, and we'll show you the badges at the bottom of our page. Instagram is the #1. For our target audience, Instagram is where they are. And you remember that slide that Peter showed just a minute ago. That age group is the target audience for us and for our current students, and it's growing with the younger students as well. So Instagram is our first one, Twitter, our WordPress blogs, and our Facebook page. YouTube is not on here, and that was a strategic move for us because we were in the process of building our YouTube channel. We recently hit 100 videos, and now we're adding YouTube into everything. Our goal was to populate YouTube before we really publicized it. I know a lot of people ask questions about how do you make sure that your channels are populated as often as possible. And one of the things that we've done is for Instagram in particular, we get student interns involved, and we allow the students to post directly to the school's Instagram account. In terms of Facebook and Twitter, most of the Instagram posts are actually pushed directly to those two avenues. So we're getting that content pushed out. And we have a lot of conversations with our students to say, hey, this is a really important thing that we're involving you in, and we want to make sure that you are being proper and appropriate. And for the most part, we've had no problems with it. I think there's been one or two things that we've had to say to them, not quite what we're going for, but this has been a really great exercise for us to do that. On the next slide, you'll see that we also put our Twitter feeds out in the actual text of our site. So we've got the athletics office. They have a Twitter account. They're one of the few extra Twitter accounts that we've had. At one point, Cheshire Academy had probably 4 or 5 Twitter accounts out there, and we made the strategic decision to merge them all together into one kind of powerhouse account. We did that for Twitter and we did that for Facebook. Athletics was the one survivor, and so what we did was we allowed them to have their own page because they were populating it so well. Game updates, the athletic trainers got involved, and they were putting out information. And we have a lot of coaches who are really active, so it gives us the option to really promote all of the things that our people are doing. On the next slide, one of the departments that lost their Twitter account was our library. We found that they didn't have a lot of followers. It really wasn't the most effective thing, and they were also struggling with trying to come up with the content to populate it as regularly as it should be. So what we did instead was we merged them in with the Cheshire Academy account, and we gave them their own hashtag. And you can do a hashtag feed to share the specific department content from that master account. So hashtag Academy Library, every time they post something, it shows up, and this shows up on their homepage, on their page as well. We also created a mashup, which you'll see on the next slide, that markets all of our social media accounts. Everything's here in one place. We have the Cheshire Academy account, we have the CA Fighting Cats account. There's one other Twitter account, I was wrong, there's one other Twitter account that we allowed to survive, which is our CA Scratch Up, which is our interns. And we wanted the interns to have their own account because we put some official messaging through the Cheshire Academy account. We didn't want students involved in that one. If we're going to say that there's a day off, we have a day of being out of dress code, we want people to know that it's coming from a secure account so our students don't have access to that main account. Instagram is not an avenue for us to be sharing that really important information, so it's okay to have them on that one. But they have their own CA Scratch Up that they populate with tweets about what they're doing, and we try to get involved with them, retweet what they're doing, they retweet what we're doing. We have our blogs, we have the Instagram, Facebook, all of that in one place. And we even have a few classroom blogs. We have some people using Tumblr. And we've actually added Tumblr to our repertoire as well because most social media accounts are actually blocked in China. And we're trying to communicate with our Chinese families right now, and we've discovered that Tumblr is not blocked. Wait a day and it may be, but for now it's not blocked in China, and so we're populating a Tumblr account right now that we can use to help promote what's going on in our school to those international families. So we try to be very strategic in what we're doing with our social media efforts, and we're very dedicated to making sure that we are populating these regularly. That's part of the decision that we made in writing a story a day. That way we always have content that we can push out. Peter, back to you.
Great, thanks. So here's the last section of the report. So it's on search engine optimization, which I know is becoming more and more important to schools. I remember the first time I'd mentioned SEO maybe 5-6 years ago, and I would just get blank stares on my face, on people's faces. And now you mentioned search engine optimization, and without a doubt, everybody in the room understands that it's an important thing that they need to manage. And so when we looked at the report, we looked at some basic on-page SEO elements, and we were looking at how many of your schools use title tags. We'll talk about that in a second. Versus meta descriptions versus keywords. You can see all the different things that we kind of pulled out at that top level. And there's some good news and some bad news. So for instance, from a takeaway standpoint, we discovered that 95% of schools use title tags. But the question is, are they being customized? So what a title tag is, it's that little grayed out kind of text that shows at the top of your browsing tab. You probably have a browser up in front of you, and you probably see it right now. That is contained in the title, which actually sits in your source code. And most content management systems have a little field for you to type in your title tag. It's good that 95% of you have title tags. That's important. But if it's the same title tag for every single page on your site, then you're making it really challenging for Google to understand what the content on that page is about. So really, the title tag should be customized to the content on the page. And so if it's just one title tag used across every page on your site, you're missing out on an opportunity to really sell your content to Google and the other search engines. You can see here's an example of Proctor Academy. I think I'm going to blow it up a little bit here. For their title tag, they use Proctor Academy, a private co-ed day and boarding school in Andover, New Hampshire. Right? Makes a lot of sense for their homepage. They want to be very clear about who they are, and they want Google to be able to index them across a number of different search combinations. Private school in New Hampshire, boarding school, Proctor Academy for a branded search. All the different possibilities. They're trying to capture that here in a title tag. Now, a title tag has a limited number of characters. You can't go hog wild. You know, it's a very limited amount of text that you can actually type in. But you do have an opportunity to really brand the page and let the search engines know what the content's all about. Now, 57% of you are using meta descriptions. So we talked about title tags, branding the page. Meta descriptions are also another way that you're able to do that. And so you can see here in the source code for Tabor, you know, the meta description is located in Marion, Mass. Tabor Academy is an independent coeducational college prep school for grades 9 through 12. Much like title tags, most CMSs allow you to, you know, type that in without having to dive into the code like I'm showing you right here. I'm just showing it to illustrate the point. Now, one thing that I really love that our search engine optimization person here at K-12 Blackbaud, he said that, he's really smart, he said that meta descriptions are essentially your sales pitch. So if you think about the way you search, you're searching for a topic. When you land on all the results for that topic, inevitably you're reading that little description that falls underneath the URL. That's the meta description. So it's your chance to make the case why somebody should click on your link and come browse your site for whatever reason they need to browse it. So we looked at that meta description, you know, back here. This is what shows up here, right here on the Google search engine return page. So located in Marion, Mass, you can see the rest of it right now. So really think about, you know, how can you create meta descriptions that accurately describe, you know, what your page is about, and will ultimately get somebody to click on that search return in Google and come browse and learn more and hopefully get into your admission funnel. So meta descriptions are really, really important. We also learned that 81% of you are using alt tags to describe your images. And so what an alt tag is, it's your chance to essentially describe whatever image is on your site. And unfortunately, this shouldn't look this way. It looks like the screen got screwed up a little bit. But in the back of it, you can see Cranbrook School. They've got a nice image on on their front page. You know, inevitably, you know, they're going to want that image to show up when somebody's searching Michigan boarding schools via Google image search. I know I use Google Images all the time. The only way Google's going to know how to categorize it is if you enter in a description for that image when you're uploading it to your CMS. Again, like meta descriptions, like titles, most CMSs give you an opportunity to easily add an alt description. So think about the images that you're uploading and think about how families and others may be searching via Google. It's another opportunity for you to get your content in front of somebody. Stacy, what's your advice for search engine optimization?
Sure. My big advice is to take a multifaceted approach to SEO. So our main goals for our SEO plan was to really look at our keyword choices. What were we going to target? We wanted to make sure that we took advantage of the page titles and the metadata that Peter was just talking about. We also wanted to make sure that we had optimized content, and then we wanted to complement that with an SEM campaign. So again, multi-channel approach. On the next slide, you'll see kind of what we use to give us our back end of this. I'm lucky to have a member of my team who is really, her specialty, Caitlin, is SEO. She's fantastic with this. So she created us a master keyword list that helps us meet our goals. And we have, I've hidden it here. You can't actually see it. You can see boarding school, which is the #1 search keyword that we try to rank for. But you can use Google's AdWords has a keyword planner tool that will allow you to go through and come up with those keywords that are important for you. You know, do you need arts ones? Do you need private school? Do you need independent school, day school? You know, it helps you just kind of come up with what you're going to do, and it tells you how many monthly searches it receives, the competition for those keyword terms, and then you'll see that we have fields for recommendations on how we're going to use it, and then the type of content that we're going to use it for. If you're interested in seeing what your competitors are doing, SpyFu, which is the screenshot that you can see here, is what you can use to find out what they're doing. You can see some of what we've been doing for summer camp here on SpyFu, but this is a great tool for you to use if you're looking to spy on what your competitors are doing, and even just to get inspiration from what your other schools are doing. So in the next slide, this shows you the content management system that we use. We're Whipple Hill School, Blackbaud School, and it lays it out for you. It's kind of easy for you to put everything together. You can see we've got the page name, Why Cheshire. We've got the custom title that we've created, Why Cheshire, Private School and CT, Cheshire Academy. Our meta keywords that we put in here, and then the meta description. submit your boarding school application today. Boarding school application is one of those keywords that we're trying to rank for. But use that keyword list to drive how you fill out things like this so that you're being very strategic with what you're doing. We've tried to be very purposeful and picking those keywords that are going to be best for us, and we're seeing a lot of great results because of it. On the next slide, I kind of will bring us through the next few things. Peter, I think you're going to have to click a few times to get everything to show up. Okay, sure. We've got the page menus. That's something that I think a lot of people forget about. Your menu titles actually do have a role in this. It's one reason, if you look at our site, we're an international baccalaureate school. People aren't searching for international baccalaureate. People can't spell baccalaureate, but they are searching for IB program. So our drop-down menu is IB program. We're making those very strategic decisions of what people are looking for. We're also doing the text content. This is part of our goal 3 was to optimize the content. And when we were going through this redesign process, we rewrote our entire site to have a better tone for the prospective audience, prospective students in particular, and we incorporated keywords as often as possible into the section. So if you search our site for private school, you're going to get this coming up, and you'll see that we've got private school curriculum, private school experience, Cheshire Academy. We're the only Connecticut private school to offer. We're the best one, we have a reputation of being one of the best private schools in the USA. We're really working all of this into our text. And you'll find at times that it's actually clunky. You may go through our site and read a few things and say, I would have worded that a little bit differently. Most likely that was part of our SEO. Again, that green slide, that's on every single page, SEO that we can change as we need to. College preparatory school in Connecticut, grade 8, PG, that's something that people are searching for, the PG program. On the next slide, or the next click, we also have, like Peter talked about, we're optimizing those photos. We've got the captions, but we've got tags, we've got descriptions, we've got the album titles, digital photography, student work. All of that goes into what we're doing to try to make sure that we're getting the best bang for our buck. On the next click, you'll see that we've got a blog. We've got the boarding school blog, and we're blogging about things. And we've actually worked to change our blog over to not be a blog about Cheshire Academy, but it's a blog about what people are searching for. Our site, again, is targeted at prospective students, so we're blogging for prospective students. Advice for applying to boarding schools. We found that that was one of the major things that was being searched for, so we stuck with it. Part 1, Part 2, Part 3. We actually have a Part 4 that's going to come out. We're holding it. We're going to do it again in the fall when people are back looking at applying to boarding schools, since they're in a different part of the funnel right now. But the blog content falls under our domain, and that supports us as well. We've been doing this for about a year now with very admission-targeted keywords. It's been a huge part of what we're doing.
Stacey, can I add one thing about the blog?
Yeah.
Yeah, so this is a really great strategy that I'm really impressed with what Cheshire is doing here, because the content that they're creating is helpful, right? It answers questions that everybody at the top of the funnel is likely going through. And so these are things that people are searching for all the time. Now, as this content gains more and more traction and kind of grows and matures and Google starts to show it more regularly and its Google search returns, the amount of time that Cheshire, how long did it take you to write these posts, Stacey? A couple hours?
Usually, I worked in admission for 5 years, so I can usually bang them out in like an hour or two.
Right. So at most, she's spending 2 hours creating really helpful content. I bet in a year's time when they go back and they look at the analytics for this content, they're going to see that on a daily basis this content is pulling in new site visitors to CheshireAcademy.org. And so essentially that 2 hours of time is having a massive return on investment, because it's gone from being a single piece of content to something that's essentially an information annuity. Like, they know every day that certain X percentage of people are going to hit this page just because they're answering questions that are common and they've got content that helps. So this is a really tremendous strategy.
Thank you. Well, and it's also evergreen content. It's content that's never going to go out of date. So our social media accounts can go back in and find a blog from a year ago and post it now, and it's still relevant. Yeah. So the next portion of our SEO campaign was that we wanted to complement it with an SEM campaign, search engine marketing. And I'm going to give you my little disclaimer here. Do your homework. always, always, always get customer reviews on the companies that you may look at before you sign on the dotted line. We, at the time that we launched this effort, our social media manager was out on maternity leave, and we didn't know that we were going to have any extra help. So we decided to contract with an external company, knowing that we were going to be down a person, and we wanted to make sure that we could do this right. We want someone else to manage it for us, helped us optimize everything, and track what's going on. It's something that we could have done ourselves, but knowing that we were going to be down a member of the team, we didn't want to do it ourselves. So we brought in somebody else, and it was a terrible experience, to be completely honest. And so we're going to do it again, but we're going to bring it in-house. We've got our full-time social media person back. It's actually a different person. Our previous social media manager decided to stay home with her 2 children. So we have a new social media manager who's going to work with our webmaster, Caitlin, and the 2 of them are going to come up with, they're going to manage an AdWords campaign. But this allows us to really target some of those keywords that don't make sense in our text. You know, one of the target audiences that we want to go after is Montessori. Montessori is a natural kind of feed into an IB program. So we can target Montessori through an SEM campaign, whereas it really doesn't work to put it into our content. And you do want to be careful to avoid putting in SEO terms that don't fit your content, because you do get penalized for trying to rank for things that you shouldn't be ranking for. You know, SEO is, you can't trick it. The algorithms that they use to do it, they really do look to make sure that it's quality stuff. And you want to make sure that what you're promoting is actually what you need to be promoting. And I think now it's back to Peter.
Yeah, so here's the big takeaway for the day, and I know that the URL was shared, so hopefully you all will go out and grab your copy and really dive into the data. I think there's a lot there to help you and your school as it considers its web strategy. I also want to pass the baton back over, because I know you've got a lot of really cool events coming up at SSATB.
I do. Thank you, Peter, and thank you, Stacy, for giving of your time during this really, really busy time of year, and thank you all for joining us for this really helpful and insightful webinar. I know there's lots of work we can do with our sites, and this information helps us set us in the right direction. And the slide that Peter just put up is thanks for doing that. We have a lot of regional seminars coming to hopefully an area near you. So admission.org has all of the information, and I hope to see a lot of you there this spring. As you can see, we start in a couple of weeks. We actually go through early June for our meetings, and they're about 3 hours long. We have keynotes and some really great information. They're usually done over lunchtime, so you'll have a chance to network and have lunch with colleagues in your area. So we hope to see many of you in the coming weeks there. You can register at admission.org and look for that information. And I also wanted you to know before we sign off that we have our call for proposals open for our annual conference. They are open until the end of April, and the conference is set for Las Vegas this year. It's September 16th through 19th. So I hope to see a lot of you there. And thank you again, reminding everyone that the webinar is recorded and available on admission.org, and so we appreciate you all joining us. Thanks again to Peter and Stacy, and there'll be a very, very brief 3-question questionnaire at the end as a feedback survey for us. I hope you'll share your thoughts. Thanks again. Thank you all for joining us. Bye-bye.